Good morning. My name is Nancy Zagaya, and I'm the Avian Rehabilitation Manager at the American Eagle Foundation. And thank you for joining us today while I talk about Raptor Rehabilitation. Our mission at the foundation is to conserve, educate, protect bald eagles and other birds of prey. And you can always follow us at www.eagles.org. First of all, should we do it? Human intervention is responsible for most raptor threats. Collisions with vehicles, power lines, wind turbines, windows, poisonings, heavy metal toxicosis from lead, mercury, zinc, rodent poisons, pesticides, habitat loss and fragmentation of land, foreign bodies like fish hooks, fishing line entanglements, plastics, and climate change, a few. Today's objectives, we're going to do an overview of wildlife rehabilitation requirements in the state of Tennessee, and we'll discuss the two core support organizations for rehabilitators. That's the National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association, founded in 1982, and the International Wildlife Rehabilitation Council, founded in 1973. Then I'm going to walk you through a rescue that we had just prior to Christmas on 12/19 of a bald eagle. We'll do a head-to-toe exam and basically give you an idea of what we do when we take in an injured raptor. And then I'll give you an update on how the bird is doing. Minimum legal requirements for wildlife rehabilitation. We are permitted by the state of Tennessee, and TWA requests 200 hours of experience with a permitted rehabilitator with the species that you intend to rehabilitate. That's the absolute minimum. Also, it was set if you've worked 1 year as a full-time licensed veterinary technician. Also, if you're a board certified licensed veterinarian in the state of Tennessee, also eligible to be a rehabilitator. You're required to give 2 references, people that know your background and capabilities. Then annually, or now it's every 2 years, TWA inspects your facility. And if you're doing migratory birds, then you're required to also have a U.S. Fish and Wildlife permit. And once you become a rehabilitator, you submit annually reports of any wildlife that you've gotten into your home or facility. Okay, the National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association mission, all rehabilitators intend to treat and release. That is our goal. The National Wildlife Rehabilitators Association is dedicated to improving and promoting the profession of wildlife rehabilitation and its contributions to preserving natural ecosystems. Ethics of wildlife rehabilitators should strive to achieve high standards of animal care through knowledge and an understanding of the field. Individuals must make an effort to be informed of the current rehabilitation information, method, regulations through participation in continuing education. A wildlife rehabilitator should strive to provide professional and humane care at all phases of wildlife rehabilitation, protecting the welfare, respecting the wildness, and maintaining the dignity of each animal in life and death. Releasable animals should be maintained in a wild condition and released as soon as appropriate. Non-releasable animals have a right to euthanasia. The International Wildlife Rehabilitation Council provides evidence-based education and resources on wildlife rehabilitation to move the field of wildlife rehabilitation forward to promote wildlife conservation and welfare and to mitigate human-wildlife conflicts worldwide through better understanding of wild animal ecology, behavior, and welfare. Both of those organizations collaborated and published the minimum standards for wildlife rehabilitation, and this is what TWA and U.S. Fish and Wildlife use as guidelines for caging, housing, etc. So I'll talk to you about this bird. His name is Kodak. We got a call from two gentlemen that saw him down in a field with cattle, and one of my cohorts retrieved him, and I'm going to walk you through a physical exam. The first assessment actually begins when we first lay eyes on the animal or the bird. And we will look to see, we'll go back for a second. You can see right now he's hooded. Ashley is holding him, and she's got both the legs in her hands. Their weapons are obviously their talons. And he was a bit lethargic when we picked him up, and we'll just discuss why as we go on. But that's when you really start your first assessment, is when you first lay eyes on. We try to always be prepared because any wild animal is going to feel threatened when it's being restrained. So before we get the bird out of the crate to treat it and assess it, we have absolutely everything ready that we might need. And safety first. So when we retrieve it, whether it's in a field or out of a crate, we cover the head with a towel and put gentle pressure on the side, keeping the wings in a normal position, and reach under and grab the talons. Then we start a head-to-toe assessment. We will palpate the top of the head for any possible fractures. We'll look for symmetry. Are the nares the same size? Sometimes the birds come in and they have an obvious injury like a fracture from being hit by a car, but frequently there's an underlying cause why they were hit by a car. So we look for signs of infectious disease. If the nares, the two holes aren't the same size, it may indicate a bacterial infection, a fungal infection. And then in the mouth, you can see in the top of the mouth, he has a choanal slit. That's normal. That communicates with the sinuses. But what we look for in the mouth, any signs of frank blood, that opening just when you look at the tongue, and that's a normal color for a bald eagle tongue, but you can see an opening in the mouth, and that is the glottis or tracheal opening, which is different. If you look down your own throat, it's a lot easier to visualize. Also, could potentially they can aspirate if you're too aggressive, like giving fluids or something like that in the mouth. So I just wanted to point that out to you. That's normal. And we look for plaque in the mouth, like any white patches. Again, it could be a fungal infection, could be a parasitic infection, or bacterial infection. So then we look in the eyes. We look for any signs of bleeding in the eye. And we look in the back of the eye. If they have a blow to the head, sometimes there'll be retinal hemorrhage. Are the eyes symmetrical? Does one pressure seem to be higher than the other? And then we check for pupillary light reflex. One thing that's different if you are a nurse or look at mammals is that birds do have striated muscle in their iris, so they can control the size of their pupil. But the pupillary light reflex is still essential. Once you see a few birds, you'll be able to tell if it's normal or not. And birds can't move their eye within the orbit. Like if you throw a cotton ball up in there and a dog will follow it and look down, but the bird would have to lower its head to look at it. Then we look in the ears, check for blood. bruising, parasites, fly eggs. If there's blood in the ear, there's a good indication that he's also got some significant ocular trauma. And then we feel the keel, and that's the breastbone, and that's a good indicator of how the bird was doing prior to coming to you. Most of the wild birds that we get in around, we expect to see it around the 2.5 range, and a 1 is pretty emaciated and will require critical care for a little while. And then we've also had some birds that are too fat to fly, so we like to see it there in the 2.5 range. And then we palpate the crop. The crop is an outpouching of the esophagus. It's located on the right side of those birds. And we check to see, is it empty? Sometimes there may be something in it, but if there's a really foul odor, the bird may have been down for a long time and dehydrated and unable to digest the food. So they wind up with what's called crop rot. So that's maybe secondary to what his initial problem that got him down on the ground. But we check for that. We check for if we feel any foreign bodies, if there's any wounds. Then we'll listen to the heart. Birds have 4-chamber hearts as in mammals. A bird's heart rate may, all legal range is usually like 180 to 250 if you're holding the animal. And if they're really stressed, it could go higher than that. It would be considered within normal limits. Then we'll check for murmurs, and whether or not it's irregular. And not that we see many defects, what it usually indicates if they're really anemic, if they're very dehydrated, or a combination of both. Sometimes I'll have murmurs on intake, which resolves once they're well hydrated and well fed. What's really fascinating is bird respiration. They have an air sac system. They don't have a diaphragm. They have a unidirectional bellows system that pumps air through stationary lungs. And why that's important is that if you restrain a bird and you put too much pressure on the chest, they could potentially suffocate. So when you see us handle the birds in these pictures, we're always giving the keel plenty of room to move. So essentially, it takes 2 respiratory cycles to move 1 packet of air completely through the avian respiratory system. And this is an efficient development for a flight. Then we palpate the abdomen. We check to see, we check the keel for body condition, but also they distribute fat in different ways, and especially the youngsters. Their keel might not be great, but you can feel fat pads in the abdomen, different parts. And rarely do we find DNA, but we do palpate. Okay, then we'll do the wing exam. We'll check for fractures, swelling. If there's no fractures are palpated, then we'll go ahead and check for range of motion. Look for wounds, feather condition, blood feathers. When birds go in a new feather, there's a blood supply in the feather, so if it gets broken, they can lose quite a bit of blood there. And so we'll address that if that happens when they come in. We also check for mites and lice, possibly clusters of maggot eggs, and if there's any foul odor, we'll do both wings. And then we'll start the femur. If any bird should be able to stand and open and close their foot. If you don't see anything immediately, but they can't do that, there's could be a fracture really high up in the femur. So what we're going through right now, I'm taking a few minutes to talk about it, but we will be doing this in a really short amount of time, and then stabilizing them and taking them to the veterinarian for a further workup. But check the feet. Obviously, this is how they catch their food. So having their feet working 100% is really important. And then we check for lesions on the bottom of the feet. And you can see those little white bumps. Those are normal, little papillae. We expect to see them. And then also we'll palpate the spine. You may not find anything on palpating the spine, but most birds that get hit by a car or other objects wind up with some amount of spinal trauma. If really severe spinal trauma, they won't be able to stand at all, and they'll lose cloacal tone, which is kind of like a rectal tone in a person. So we also check the cloaca, and I said it's the closest thing in human is the rectum, but it's also where urates come through as well. And any bird that's relatively healthy, even birds with fractures will be clean. Their feathers will be clean. If not, then we think about is it spinal trauma? Do they have a heavy parasite load or some bacterial diarrhea? So if most of the birds that come to us have some degree of dehydration, people will find them and they may have been down for 2 or 3 days before someone comes across them. So I'd have to say that most of the time the birds that we get in are 7 to 10% dehydrated, and just their eyes are dull or slightly sunken. Their mucous membranes will be really kind of sticky. Their veins on their wings will be really slow to fill. If you look at the skin, like usually in the inguinal area, the folds in the legs are the easiest area to determine that. We just sort of wet that down a little bit and look. If they're 10 to 12% dehydrated, they won't be producing any feces or urates, and it's difficult to find a pulse. And then, of course, if it's more than that, shock and death. So I want to just give you an idea of, we wanted to stabilize Kodak before we drove him to the veterinarian an hour away. So when he came in, he weighed about 7.7 pounds. His body condition was about a 2.5 out of 5. But he did seem a bit dehydrated. So we gave him what's considered maintenance fluids of 50 mils per kilogram under his skin, which was, you can see the big syringe there. That's a 60 cc syringe. So we gave him a couple of those, few of those. And then, as I'll show you in a few minutes, we did notice a pretty severe wing droop, and he did have a lot of swelling. The carpus, if I had wings, this joint here was very swollen. So he was given some meloxicam, which is non-steroidal anti-inflammatory prior to leaving. Also, another screen that we routinely do is we'll check for lead. This instrument here, lead care, is the same screening tool that they use to check children for lead toxicosis. And we normally expect it to be less than 3.3. And Kodak, his was 16, which is considered positive. So we'll talk a little bit about lead poisoning in raptors. We did find Kodak during hunting season. Lead ammunition used in hunting deer, elk, and moose is the most problematic reason that we find lead. When a deer is field dressed and the gut piles are left in the field, they are usually eaten by vultures, bald eagles. You know, a lot of animals could be susceptible to lead poisoning from that. And a lead fragment the size of a grain of rice can kill an eagle. So we recommend, of course, not using lead ammunition. So at UT College of Veterinary Medicine, he was put under anesthesia and taken to radiology. I just showing you 2 slides, but they did multiple slides to rule out any additional problems. But they were looking, like in the top one, they were looking for any signs of lead that may still be in the GI tract. A treatment may have been a little bit different if they had seen it. And then on the bottom slide, like I said, that's his left wing, and his injury is here, and he subluxated. So we brought Kodak back to the foundation where he received calcium EDTA treatments for a couple of weeks. When I rechecked his lead on the 27th, he's down to 4.8 micrograms from the 16. He's much more bright and alert. He received, we kept him in a smaller enclosure and given his wrist a chance. The wrist injury was an old injury, judging from the amount of inflammation and all. That was probably not the reason he was down. The reason that we saw him somewhat lethargic was related to the lead toxicosis. As of right now, he's bright and alert. He's flying well. We are not, if you can see in this picture, his left wing still droops a bit. He will still go in for recheck x-rays on that wing. He flies well, but it's not determined right now if he will fly well enough to survive in the wild. Of course, we're going to give him that opportunity if we can, or we'll wait for their next veterinarian report. But he could possibly join the other bald eagles on Eagle Mountain if it's determined that his injury is too severe for him to survive in the wild. So what can you do to help? Like I said, use a non-lead ammunition and non-lead fishing materials. Remove fishing line from waterways. It's safe if you see carcasses on the roadways and can move them. We, especially this time of year when food supply is a little bit low, a lot of raptors will go after roadkill, and then they wind up getting hit by a car. Find non-poison ways to take care of rodent problems. And like I said, you can follow us at www.eagles.org to learn more ways to help. And I want to mention too, if you're interested in wildlife rehabilitation, both organizations are excellent, NWRA and IWRC. Their website address is up there on the screen. And the NWRA has an excellent symposium annually. Of course, this year it's virtual, and it's February 23rd. If you're interested, I recommend that you Google this address and check it out. So can we take some questions?
How many eagles would you estimate that you've worked on in your career?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay, I have been working with wildlife since 1995, and at the time I was at UT College of Veterinary Medicine as a licensed veterinary technician, and we, and I'm just gonna guess. I don't know, a few hundred. I don't.
Do you think that Kodak is going to be able to go back to the wild?
I think so. He is flying remarkably well. He's a strong flyer, and he flies perch to perch during the day. And I'm really, really hopeful as he is. We will track him. We're leaning towards releasing him, and we will track him if he seems to be having any difficulty. Then we'll make an effort to bring him back. But yes, release is always our goal.
What's the most common injury you see in birds?
The most common injury that we see in birds is, I would say, hit by cars. We get a lot of wing injuries. The humerus, we see a lot of humeral fractures, and then the radius and ulna. They seem to, get blindsided by a car. We do see leg fractures, but not. Definitely wings are the most common. One thing I didn't mention when I was talking about the respiratory system, in addition to this bellow system, they also have pneumatic bones, which means the bones are hollow. They're part of the respiratory system. So if they fracture, say, a humerus, which is one of the pneumatic bones, and you flush the wound too aggressively, could potentially cause them to aspirate. So that's another variation in birds of prey.
My 8-year-old son Ruben wants to know what their feathers feel like.
Well, 8-year-old Ruben wants to know what feathers feel like. Well, they're very soft and they're very light, and owl feathers are amazing, even softer. They can be a little bit firm, and like I said, they used to, in the old days, they would use eagle feathers that are dropped and dip them in ink to write with.
What's the hardest injury you worked on before?
The hardest injury? Well, one of the most challenging things around this time of year, birds will come in very emaciated. They may come in with a fracture, but also very emaciated, and they can be really difficult. It takes a long time to get them back to a condition where they can be released.
What type of birds or variety of birds do you work on?
Well, at the foundation, we have a variety, any bird of prey. So that includes the vultures, all the hawks, all the eagles. Right now we have 5 barred owls, all with similar injuries. Like I said, the food supply, the younger birds that may not be the best hunters yet, may go for roadkill. Also, it seems the owls that are coming in, there may be something that runs across the road and they get blindsided by headlights and wind up getting hit by a car.
Have you ever had to amputate an eye, and so did they go back to the wild?
An eye? That's a good question. Have we ever had to take out an eye and have them go back to the wild? For a long time in rehabilitation, it was considered inhumane to return a one-eyed owl or any raptor to the wild. But there's been recent research that they do survive. That may be a species to species decision, but we currently will, if they have a severe injury and take out an eye, they have to, in order for any of our birds to get returned to the wild, they have to go to prey school, which means they have to be able to catch a live mouse. So once we know that they can catch their food adequately and their other behaviors are normal, then yes, we will release them back into the wild.
Have you ever rescued baby eagles?
Yes. Let me go back to. Sometimes a lot of our baby eagles that come to us because their tree or their nest has fallen. I'm going to go back to one of my first slides. A quick little review. Okay, this is Carson. Carson is now a large eagle and has become one of our ambassadors. He came to us because his tree fell down around Tellico Lake, and he had a fracture here. That purple thing that you can see is a bandage, and he had a metal bar to repair his humerus. The humerus healed nicely, but he also had a subluxation in that same shoulder, which meant he couldn't fly. He can hop and he can get a little bit of lift, but he's non-releasable because of that injury. At some time, if you visit the American Eagle Foundation, you'll be able to meet Carson. But that's a really common scenario for the youngsters that we get. Occasionally, there'll be, we've had a youngster that the parents fed it fish with a fish hook and things like that. But I'd have to say falling from the nest is the most common. How can we tell if it's a boy or a girl? Well, in the bird of prey world, the girls are bigger than the boys. And the further north you go, the larger the birds are. So sometimes the weight range is, you don't know if it's a bird that is from the north. Well, let me rephrase that. It's a gray zone. You can sort of tell. There's a way to measure the talons, give you an estimate, but the way we actually find out at the Eagle Foundation is we submit blood for DNA testing so that we know who are the boys for sure and who are the girls for sure.
Last question. Can you share your personal best story on rehabilitation?
My personal best story on rehabilitation. I guess the best story when I look back, because I've been doing this since 1995, is that we are moving ahead as a community to really develop evidence-based practice in rehabilitation. And when I first started doing this, it was like reinventing the wheel. And when I found those two organizations and realized that people have been working on all this, the nutrition and health and what's best natural history-wise for each species, it was really wonderful. And I can't think of one specific animal. I've been really privileged to have been able to work with multiple species for all that time. And I'm excited about putting a lot of energy into continuing to rehabilitate birds of prey And I just encourage you, if you are interested in rehabilitation, to look at organizations that are promoting education and well-being. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to be with you this morning.